Thanks you guys so much for coming. I've been talking about this for years, but I felt like I was fighting an uphill battle, and I was fighting it on my own at the time, running a practice, raising 4 children, and so forth, so it was very difficult. So it's so nice to have a group of like-minded people and to have a mom who is absolutely on fire with this. That's what I was awaiting for, a mom who had the energy and the passion to do this. And unfortunately, it took, I always say something good comes out of something bad. So unfortunately, it took 2 children who were really struggling and falling behind in the school system to really fuel this train to get this movement going so that we can help children that have visual and auditory processing problems in the schools, because many of them are being misdiagnosed or they're being mislabeled. Oftentimes, these individuals look like they have ADHD. They can't pay attention to anything. They can't see well, they can't see right. How can you focus on something if you can't see it? How can you attend to what is being said if your brain didn't really hear it? So it's sort of like, I have to give my brain access to this information so that it knows what to do with it. It's not as simple as putting on glasses or a hearing aid. As we oftentimes think of hearing and visual problems, we think about acuity or sensitivity. So you test vision, and the child has 20/20 vision, and they say, there's nothing wrong with the child, he's just, he doesn't want to read. He's just lazy, he doesn't really try hard enough. Maybe, he needs to be on medication. In the auditory processing world, we have a similar thing. We have children that have normal hearing sensitivity. Oftentimes, by the time they get to me, they've had 4 or 5 normal hearing tests, and they still can't hear, and the parents are like, oh, he has selective hearing, he hears what he wants to hear, and so forth. And we say, A, it's not as selective as you really think it is. These children have trouble hearing in groups in particular. So imagine classrooms. And they have trouble hearing in noisy places. Like here we have, we have carpeting and we have draperies and so forth. So we have sound absorbing surfaces, but in classrooms, it's pretty much hard shell all the way around. And sound is bouncing all over the place, and we have a lot of reverberation. So children have trouble hearing in those noisy places, kids with auditory processing problems. They very often mishear what you say. You can say share, and they might hear chair. And so they sit in the chair. And you're like, why are you sitting in the chair? I asked you to share. Like, oh, and they don't it's not a hearing loss. And auditory processing problems, the school systems don't even consider them. They don't even consider them, period. They're not even recognized. But an auditory processing disorder is a type of hearing impairment. It's not a hearing loss, but it's a type of hearing deficit when your brain doesn't hear. Because you really don't see with your eyes, and you really don't hear with your ears. You see and hear with your brain. It's how your brain is able to put this information together and then interpret it. And so kiddos with auditory processing problems oftentimes are labeled as inattentive and lazy, put on medication, diagnosed with ADHD, ADD, and so forth. And that's a simple solution to having a child sit in a seat, be a zombie, leave the teacher alone, and they're not moving forward. They're not learning anything. And parents are frustrated. They don't know what to do. It's not their job really to be teachers. Some parents will homeschool their kids and so forth. But all of these children are suffering and struggling, and there's a larger percentage than you know. There's probably 5 to 10% of kids in the school class at any school classroom that have auditory processing disorders that are not diagnosed, and probably even more than that have visual processing disorders, right? I don't know really about the visual world, but in the auditory world, because auditory processing disorders are not well understood, and the school system is not recognizing them, not even the medical societies are recognizing this. These children have auditory processing problems, and so the kids are being penalized for this. And insurance companies don't pay for this kind of intervention. They don't pay for this type of testing. They don't recognize it, and so parents are having to go out of pocket. And so many children, we're looking at their symptoms, and we're band-aiding their symptoms, but we're not getting to the underlying root cause of the problem. And by the time kids get to me, they're older. They're like 7 or 8 years old. And even though we can still help them, neuroplasticity decreases significantly after age 7. So we need to be finding these kids much earlier. We need to find them at like preschool level. As an audiologist, there's certain things that I know that I can look for to be able to identify kids. And we have things such as, we have checklists that have certain symptoms that teachers can just look through this 25 list of questions and they can check these things off to flag kids that might be at risk or whatever. We're now that things are more online, they're even developing certain testing protocols online for auditory processing. And they take moments to do. And some of these interventions that we're providing are now online. And there are things that can be implemented in the schools. And not only just the technology that's needed and the intervention that's needed, it's education that's needed. Teachers don't know anything or very little about auditory processing and visual processing disorders. And if they had this information, they could adapt their teaching style a little bit. Kids with auditory processing disorder can't sit in the back seat of the class. Or they can't sit in the chair that's over here and look at the teacher's ear instead of their face because they rely so much on lip reading. And COVID has been very difficult when teachers have to wear masks and people are wearing masks because these individuals are unable to lip read because of the masks. It's a very difficult situation for them. So even just educating the teachers on some modifications of the classroom, like maybe putting some cork boards or some beanbag chairs so that there's not so much reverberation. Maybe giving written handouts instead of the child always having to maybe look at the board and copy information down onto their paper and things like that. There's a lot of little simple things that can be done. Maybe speaking a little slower, because I know I'm speaking quickly to give time for everybody else, but these kids can't hear well when you talk very fast. It's sort of like Charlie Brown's teacher over here. For those of you who know Charlie Brown, wah, wah, wah. But anyway, so I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're hearing a little bit to get a little bit of a feel for what this problem is in terms of the auditory world, because many of the kids that I see come to me because they can't read. And I know that they're also going to see our vision specialists because they can't read either. And so on the ear part, but they're the eye part, what is reading? The integration of visual and auditory information. And if you can't process well through the visual channel and can't process well through the auditory channel, you can give these kids as many worksheets as you want and as many little books to try to take home and read. But if their eyes don't stay on the line of print as they're going across, or a book sounds like a duh to them, then we're miles ahead of where we should be. We have to back it up to the level where they're at. We have to help them. We have to intervene. So I'm hoping that we can keep pushing and that we can really grow this organization. I also like to make a contribution from Brainchild. Thank you. A check for that as well. And also, if there are any questions at the end of this meeting, I'd be glad to speak to you guys.